You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. Today we want to talk with Will Warshauer, who is the CEO of TechnoServe, and we're going to speak with Will about the work that they're doing around the globe in developing nations to help people who are struggling in poverty. Will, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Thanks, Art. Pleasure to be here.
Well, let's jump right in with a little bit about you and how you came upon this work.
Yeah, it goes back a long ways now, Art. I was a young man graduated from college. I studied literature there, so I didn't really know what to do with myself with a literature degree. I knew I didn't want to teach, and came down to law school and the Peace Corps. I applied to both and got accepted at both, and much to my father's chagrin, I thought the Peace Corps would be a more interesting thing to do, so I went and lived in Sierra Leone in West Africa for 2 years. I worked with small farmers there. I lived in a small village in the north with no electricity, no running water, and it just opened up a whole other world for me. And seeing how people were living there and how just a little extra income could make a huge difference in their lives kind of set me off on the path I've been on ever since.
Well, that's impressive. I have to tell you, I had a child who was in the Peace Corps, and it's not easy work. You know, it's tough because you're going to a place that you know very little about. And nonetheless, I noticed that from my daughter in particular and others who've gone, that they develop such a bond with the people there. And they also develop an emotional attachment to what they're going through. And of course, then it's over. But like so many people, what they experience sort of stays with them throughout their lives. And I dare say that is maybe your case. Tell me more about how it's lingered with you, that experience.
Well, I appreciate you asking. It is really formative. There was, I lived in a remote part of the country, and there was a young boy who was probably 10 or 11 years old who lived in the same village where I was staying for the 2 years. His name was Bolo, and he was one of these kids, you know the type. He was quick smile, very smart kid, clever, nice guy, and we ended up hanging out a lot together. And at some point, it hit me that Bolo had so few opportunities in his life. Life expectancy in Sierra Leone at that time was about 35 to 40 years. The best Bolo was going to do was to get a pretty low quality primary school education. He might never travel more than 15 or 20 miles away from the village where he was born and raised. And it was clear as anything to me, crystal clear, that if he had been born in my circumstances, born the son of a doctor, a medical doctor in the United States, he could have gone to Harvard, he could have done whatever he wanted to do, would have had every opportunity in the world. But because of this sort of cosmic roulette wheel, his opportunities were so limited. And so in that sense, I think about him a fair amount, and I think about the work that TechnoServe does in some sense as giving people opportunities.
How long have you been with the organization?
They were foolish enough to put me in charge, Art, about 10 years ago now.
Okay. Well, that's a good amount of time. One of the things I try to impart upon people who want to work in this sector is that things don't happen overnight. And it does take people who are committed over the long term to really see the kind of change that they hope for when they join. After 10 years, what have you seen that's different than when you started?
Well, I think I've seen in our work a tremendous amount of progress at the same time as in the last few years we've seen the world's poor suffering from a number of sort of interlocked crises. The COVID crisis created a whole host of economic dislocations, and the poor really suffered through those. And then the crisis in Ukraine has affected the world's poor more than most people think. A lot of the world's wheat was supplied by Ukraine, and countries that were importing wheat have really struggled. And you put the climate crisis on top of the Ukraine crisis and the COVID crisis, and the World Bank's estimated something like 100 million people have gone backwards into extreme poverty in the last few years. So there is more need than ever for the kind of work that we do.
Wow, 100 million people going backward. Is that the number you just said? Did I?
That's what the
hear
World
something?
Bank has estimated as
Wow.
if you take all those crises one on top of the other. There are a lot of people in dire shape at the moment.
So what kind of services are you able to provide people in some of the most challenging locations around the globe?
So we're an interesting nonprofit. We're a nonprofit founded almost 60 years ago, and our tagline since our founding has been business solutions to poverty. So that sounds a little strange perhaps, but the whole point of that is to create change that lasts over time, lasts on its own. And so our mission of fighting global poverty is done in a way that doesn't rely on aid or charity, but helps people reach their full potential to earn a good long-term income that gives their family a better life. And so we work with people around the world to help them start or grow an enterprise, or most of the low-income people in the world are actually earning their living through farming. So a lot of our work is with very small-scale farmers, helping them improve their farms and helping connect them to markets where they can sell their crops for a better price. We've got a very great mix of local and international approach. About 95% of the staff of TechnoServe are working in the country that they're from. And so who better than someone from there to know how things really happen on the ground? And if you piece that together with some high-quality analysis that lets you design good programs where the small farmer, the small business person can win, you can create a change at great scale. We measure our success. We're a bunch of data geeks over here at TechnoServe. I should own that. And so we spend a lot of time looking at the impact of our programs. It's much harder to understand the impact that a nonprofit's having than if you're looking at a for-profit business, as I think you and your colleagues probably know very well. But the main metric that we look at is the additional money earned by the people who participate in our programs and compare that to what they were earning before they worked with TechnoServe. And so I'm delighted to report that last year our clients earned over $400 million in additional income, which is a meaningful number by any measure. And for some small farming families, even a few hundred extra dollars a month can make the difference between having a metal roof on your house or not, being able to send your kids to school or not, having some money in savings, being able to afford medicine when your baby gets sick, things like that. The number we focus on a lot is the kind of money in, money out. And so for each dollar that goes into a TechnoServe program, the participants in that program come out the other end with an extra $5.60 of earnings. So we're very proud of that number. That's across a whole bunch of different interventions over the 35 countries where we're currently working.
Okay, so what's the secret here? I mean, if you can do this, it would seem to me that we have in our hands the tools to eradicate a big chunk of poverty around the world. So what is it that you're doing specifically to help their businesses or to get them in businesses and obviously succeed? Now, is it them just needing a hand up, or is it more what you're offering, or a combination?
Well, I'm going to answer your question by telling you a story because I think it's really the best way to make it real, and I've got a couple of stories if we have time. But
Sure.
as I said earlier, I think about our business as just helping people have an opportunity. Nick Kristof has said that intelligence and industriousness is distributed equally around the globe, but opportunity is not, and he's absolutely right about that. And so if we can find and help people find an opportunity, they can take it and run with it. And let me ask you a question, Art. Did you drink a cup of coffee today? Are you a coffee person?
I'm not much of a coffee person, but I did have my breakfast shake, which is my drink of
All right.
choice.
Well, I'm a dedicated coffee drinker, as millions of people are. I'm on my third cup today.
Okay.
And most people don't think much about where their coffee comes from. But I mentioned that many low-income people earn their living through farming. And certain crops, like coffee, can help a family earn good money if they can grow it in the right way, grow a high quality that international buyers want to buy. And sort of that's where TechnoServe comes in. So just to play this out for you in one small example is a woman in Ethiopia named Lubaba Makonnen. And Lubaba had two children, and unfortunately, as is often the case around the world, her husband had left the family. So she was working odd jobs to try to support her two kids. And she was invited and attended a TechnoServe training where she got the skills of how to grow more coffee and how to grow that coffee to a standard which was high enough that the buyers that had a lot of money would pay extra for a high quality coffee. So she got training. She became part of a farmer cooperative, and that's another technique that we use to help farmers come together to gain, share knowledge and gain negotiating power, because they're often having to buy inputs, or they can sell, if they've got a higher volume of coffee, they can sell it at a better price to an international buyer. We connected them with what are called wet mills, which is how coffee's processed after it comes off the tree, which is another way that you can raise the quality and therefore the value of the coffee you're growing. And connected them with some international buyers. Ethiopia is famous all over the world for the quality of its coffee, so a lot of coffee buyers want to go there and will pay top dollar for the coffee. At any rate, she was part of a very large activity that involved over 100,000 farmers over almost a decade. And on average, all those farmers grew their incomes by 27% being a part of that program. But Lubaba, who worked especially hard and started from a low base, did even better. And she improved her income by more than 100%.
Wow.
And so what does that translate into? Because while we measure it by the money, we only measure it because the money's a proxy for what people can do and how it changes their lives. And what she did was, first of all, she bought a house. She paid to have electricity installed in her house, which she hadn't had before. She bought more land where she could grow more coffee and increase her income further. And she opened a shop for household goods, which was another way that her family earned money. Now, here's the really important part, and the part that gets into really long-lasting and breaking some intergenerational patterns. Her kids had always dreamed of going to university. And you may be surprised to know that according to the World Bank, only 1% of people in Ethiopia have a college degree. And that rate is even lower in rural areas, as you can imagine. But with her coffee income from her coffee and her small shop, she has sent both of her children to school. Her son is now in his third year at university. Her daughter is going to start college next year and wants to be a doctor. And I wrote down Lubaba in her own words. What she said is, and I'm quoting her, "Society does not expect women to prosper very much on their own. Without better coffee yields and a positive mindset, I don't think I would be where I am now." Now, what's the key part of this? We're getting to the key now, which is that we worked with Lubaba 10 years ago. We just helped her gain the skills and the connections that she needed to boost her income for the long term. This was enough to transform her life, and we hope to break the cycle of poverty for this next generation. Education is often the key to doing that. But she's earning that money on her own. We gave her that opportunity. We cracked the door open for her. She went through that door with great energy and determination and has been working hard and succeeding ever since. And that is really the sort of long-term nature. And that's why we think business solutions is the way to go, because if you're not doing something which lasts long after a project ends, then you're not doing your best for these people.
Yeah, it's got to be sustainable.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about Lubaba as an example of some of the people you've helped. So you came across Lubaba who needed some help, and she attended, what is it, a workshop that you were having on how people could increase their yields from their crops? And who
Yeah, I
taught
mean,
the
it was,
class? Where did you find the people to teach it? And
well, so I taught.
I know I'm getting real granular
No,
now,
no,
but
it's
I'm really
it's a
curious.
great set of questions, and it starts with good analysis. I talked about sort of marrying high quality international analysis with local knowledge,
Yeah,
and that's exactly what happened. A bunch of smart ex-McKinsey consultants who work at TechnoServe realized 15 or so years ago that the global demand for fancy coffee was going up seemingly without limit. That
yeah,
people's willingness to pay for fancy coffee was going up. There's a real opportunity, and high-end coffee generally can't be grown on big plantations. So about 80% of the fancy coffee in the world is grown by smallholder farmers. And you don't need much land to make a decent living growing coffee. So it was that sort of bedrock was the analysis which led us to launch these coffee programs all over the world with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, among others. And that's where we met Lubaba. Now, we would go into these communities and we would train people from the community. If you get a PhD agronomist, uh, that's actually not a good thing because they'll tell you 27 things that a coffee farmer needs to do. And while that's true, it's too much for the average small scale farmer. And so we have, over the years, distilled that down into just a handful of practices that have the biggest return for the buck. But the training that she attended was provided free of charge. Anybody in the community could come to it. It was led by people from the community that we had trained, and it taught her over a period of weeks some best practices in coffee agronomy. It's simple things, and it's interesting that even in places where people have grown coffee for a long time, there are often a handful of very simple practices that can raise the yield of the coffee trees by up to 50% sometimes. And the things she needed to do to improve the quality of the coffee, because that's really also, and if you can raise the yield of your trees and the quality, you're getting more money in both instances, and you can really transform the economics of your household. So that combined with getting her into a cooperative, combined with getting her connected to wet mills and local quality processing, connecting her to these high-end buyers, all that together helped her achieve the kind of dramatic results that she saw.
that's a remarkable story. And you mentioned people like McKinsey involved who can help you chart out where some of the great opportunities are for people to thrive if they can get into it.
That is a
Um,
little bit of our special sauce, Art.
yeah,
We've got a lot of people who come to us from the management consulting industry, and they take a big pay cut to come and work here. They want their work to matter. They don't want to just help another company sell more soap. They want to do something about what we think is the world's most pressing problem, all these millions of people living in poverty who just need an opportunity. And so that kind of analysis, time and again, has helped us find opportunities where the small farmer or the small business person can win. I got another quick story for you if you got time
sure.
for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love these.
There's another woman I met recently. I was traveling in northern Rwanda, and her name is Eugenie. And sticking with this theme, because it's a very important theme to us at TechnoServe, of long-term impact. This is a woman that we worked with 10 years ago. And recently, as I've traveled around the world, I've asked our teams, the TechnoServe team, wherever I've gone, to connect me to some people we worked with in the past to check in and see how they're doing and if they're still benefiting from some of the training they got. So this woman took a TechnoServe course a decade ago, and it was about entrepreneurship. The course was designed to help her identify some small business opportunities in her community. And so 10 years ago, taking that course, she saw that there was demand for fresh eggs in her community greater than the supply. A lot of people wanted fresh eggs. There weren't enough fresh eggs. So she decided 10 years ago to start a business raising chickens and selling eggs. And you get a sense of how entrepreneurial she was. She was a very young woman at that time, mid-20s, I think. And she didn't have anywhere to raise the first 100 chicks. You need an enclosure to raise your chickens. But as you may know, in Africa, often people have a separate building that they cook in. So that was all she had. So she took all of her cooking utensils out of that building and cooked under the stars. And she raised her first 100 chickens in that building. She was that entrepreneurial to want to do that. Now, there I go, hiking up the hill to her house 10 years later. I meet her 10 years later for the first time. She now has 8 buildings full of chickens.
Wow.
She is selling 4,500 fresh eggs every day.
Wow.
She's employing 12 people full-time, another 10 people part-time. And again, the last interaction we had with her professionally was 10 years ago. And I talked with her about what she learned in that course. She's never taken another course in business since.
She could probably teach some.
That's right. That's right. She is debt free. She borrowed some money at some point during the past 10 years to help grow her business. She's paid it all back. And she was just now, 10 years later, expanding her house and renovating her house, showing that she had just been plowing the profits back into the business. But if you think about the employment she's generated, and if you think about the role model, if you to be it, you've got to be able to see it sort of idea. The young women in her community who see her, who see Eugenie and what she's accomplished and what she's doing, I think that opens up a whole set of new possibilities in their minds as well. So those stories, I mean, I can't tell you how much energy and excitement I get when I'm able to meet people like that and hear their stories and see the lasting impact that an interaction with TechnoServe 10 years ago helps to drive.
What are some of the places around the world that you're working in right now?
We work in about 35 countries. Most of them are in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, but we're also in India and in Asia and in about 10 countries in Latin America and South America and Central America.
And that gives you the ability to serve how many people roughly?
Well, last year our work helped improve the lives of an estimated 3.1 million people.
Wow. So you're calculating that using people you've actually touched and the derivative support that they're able to provide families and others, or is it like one?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So somebody like Eugenie or like Lubaba, their whole family is better off when they're in one of these programs and benefits. So we're counting that. And then they're counting some other people who may benefit indirectly. If you generate some economic opportunity, this woman selling all these eggs is paying for transportation and paying for packaging and other things. So there's some other benefits that go on when you do that.
Right. There are definitely those derivative impacts that you're able to create from these kinds of programs. So you mentioned up front that I think the number was an additional 300,000 more dollars. What was the number? 300 million more dollars, I think you said. My memory is not.
Last year, the participants in our programs earned an additional, it was more than $400 million.
400 million. Okay. Now, that's a great number. But you also said that there's a need that has been generated because of COVID and other things over the last few years. How are we going to now get to the actual new need that's been generated? So what are your plans to kind of expand this work in a way that you can now begin to help people who are affected by things beyond their control?
Well, I'll say two things about that, Art. I mean, first of all, we are trying to grow our own programs and reach more people. And this was a strategy we adopted a couple of years ago, in part in response to all of these crises. So I'm delighted to report that last year our work grew by 22%, and we look to be up another 8 or 9% this year. So we are reaching more people with more programs in more places. But I think the development community in general is still missing a very big and to me kind of obvious opportunity. And that is, I go back to my old saw of long-term impact. Because what happens in development, most of your listeners may be shocked to know that the long-term impact of development work is almost never measured. What gets measured is often a development project that may last for 3 years. And so they have good measurement at the beginning. What are these people earning, or what's their coffee tree doing? And then 3 years later, has that increased by how much, and so on. But that's where the evaluation tends to end. And what needs to happen is we need to go back 3, 5, 10 years later to understand, because if those people haven't continued to benefit after the end of a project, then the project really hasn't been what we all want. We all want to teach people how to fish, not give them fish, right? And they've got to be able to continue to do it after the end of a project. And so that's a real missed opportunity currently. There's almost no evaluation that goes on after projects are over. And what we've seen in those rare instances when it does happen is that very often a project looks great 3 years, right at the end of the project. There's been a lot of money, a lot of attention, people are doing better. But you fast forward 3 years or 5 years, and all those benefits have sometimes gone away. Now, that's important information that we and the donors and other implementers like us, everybody needs to know that so we can design better poverty alleviating programs and know which kind of interventions have a better chance of lasting over time.
Yeah.
So that's a real miss right now in international development. And one of my issues is going around trying to talk donors into funding more of this and requiring more of it, because we would all benefit if we had more data about long-term impact. But right now, it's another miss. So that's another key to unlocking, I think, the more impact we all need to have in the face of the poor people that have suffered through these recent crises.
Well, my futurist friends, particularly Bob Johansen, would tell me that we're in a very brittle world now, and certainly organizations themselves are brittle, and the ability for them to be sustained over a period of time is increasingly difficult. So I wanted to back up from what I asked you before when I said, what are you doing now to expand? Expanding is great, and we certainly would encourage that, but sometimes it's okay to just maintain if that's what you're able to do. I mean, if you're able to increase wages by over $300 million, I keep getting that wrong, $300 million.
Over 400 million, actually.
Over 400 million, still getting it wrong. Over 400 million. And, people's lives have been changed and affected by that, and in the ripples of it, that's pretty good. That's pretty amazing, actually. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm greedy and saying you should be doing more, although it'd be great if you could. And by the same token, I don't want to discount those programs that may not be quite up to what you're able to do, right? There's some who are out there, maybe that's all they can produce is 3 years worth of impact. But those 3 years might be mighty and transformative for some people. And it could also be that the circumstances that created the change for them in that short period of time quickly change because we're seeing a change in the world. And so, the brittleness of the world could be somewhat of a challenge for different organizations. I do appreciate what you're saying, though, that we need to have both. We need to have organizations that can jumpstart people right away, and maybe they're here for a hot minute and they go away, but then there are others like yours that are really focused on creating sustainable change. And, because everybody's not going to be a business owner, right? Everybody's not cut out for that, but we certainly need them. And others might be sustained in some other ways or a series of ways, because maybe they learned something and what they learned is no longer relevant and they have to learn something else. And we're seeing that here in the United States. So, I don't want to discount too much the work that some other organizations are doing that may not have the same ability to create sustainable change over long periods of time. But I'm damned impressed by what you're able to do. I can tell you that, given that you're able to create lasting changes for people like the ones you mentioned in your examples. You have an amazing thing going on here, and it would be great to see it expand. Now, are you doing this also in partnership with others? Are you able to teach these to other organizations who may also go out and assist or create this kind of change in other places?
Well, absolutely, Art. Poverty is a complex problem, and
It sure is.
So we work in partnership with all sorts of different organizations, other larger or international organizations like ourselves, but a whole host of smaller NGOs and civil society organizations in Africa and India and Latin America, and a whole host of businesses. So we work in partnership with a lot of businesses, a lot of coffee companies that are sourcing coffee and care about the welfare of the farmers who are growing their coffee and want to make sure that they're earning enough to have a decent standard of living. So working very often in partnership. And to your earlier point, yes, I mean, everybody's got a role to play. In the international sphere, there's often sort of breaking groups into relief agencies if there's a crisis and people just need food and blankets and medicine delivered to them.
Yeah.
And I have so much respect for my friends that do that sort of work. But I think if you are doing the development work as TechnoServe does, you want to try as best you can to try to take a long view, because your impact is going to be multiplied if you can do it in a way that the people themselves pick up and carry forward. And so that's why I'm such an advocate for more measurement of that, so we can devote more resources to those kinds of interventions that produce lasting impact.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about how you're supported. You mentioned the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is one of your supporters. How can other people support you, or are you getting support from, let's say, everyday givers who look at what you're doing and say, I'd like to put a little money into creating some sustainable change for people?
We do get absolutely essential support from private individuals who hear about us and get excited about what we're doing. And we really appreciate organizations like the BBBY's Giving Alliance as places where people who want to make a difference can help assess different charities and decide where they want to give. And we certainly encourage anybody who's thinking about making a gift to look at what BBBY's Giving Alliance is saying, look at what groups like Charity Navigator or Candid are saying. There are agencies out there that can help you steer them. My own personal advice to donors who've asked me is, because everybody has a nice fancy website these days, but take some time to look and read and dig in a little bit, and in particular focus on what any charity says about their impact or results. Yeah. And do they focus on results, or do they focus on just the actions that they took? Because too often you'll see language that says, well, we trained so many people, or our work touched so many people. And in my view, that doesn't really tell you enough. You really want to know what that training accomplished. And so if they're able to say that yields grew by so many percent or incomes rose by so many percent, that's, I think, indicative of a charity that's taking that seriously. We're coming up on the holidays, hard to believe. And I know that a number of us around the holidays think about loved ones that aren't here anymore. And so I just want to, if anybody's thinking about that, or I got always a problem with my stepfather, what do you get for a present, a guy who has everything? It's often nice to think about a tribute gift, making a gift in memory of somebody who may not be around anymore, as a way to honor that person and remind everybody about him or her. And so that's a nice way to do it with TechnoServe or many other organizations, obviously, but we've got a special place where people can learn more if they're thinking about a tribute gift. It is our website, www.technoserve.org/heart of giving, as a way to think about a tribute
I
gift.
like Heart of Giving.
I thought you might like that.
I like Heart of Giving. I think that you have something really special here. I'm really excited by what you're doing. And this is certainly an option for people who are thinking about how they can make change in the world. I just had a conversation with two members of this thing called the Generosity Commission, which is working to help increase participation in giving to charitable organizations. And the report of the Generosity Commission just came out. And there's some recommendations that focus on helping people appreciate that even small gifts matter. We're so hung up on thinking that our gift is too small, the problem's too big, what difference is it going to make? But in your case, you can kind of see where a few $100s going to a particular, company or small startup could make a huge difference to what that business is able to do. Maybe it buys some seeds. Maybe it helps get some additional labor. Maybe it helps feed the owner while they're trying to get something going. I just think that there's so many things that we can do that don't cost a lot of money that can still make a huge impact, that people need to be aware of that. And certainly your program, which not only produces short-term but also long-term benefits, is something that people might really want to consider. So I congratulate you, and I want to encourage you and your teammates to keep doing the work that you're doing and tell those stories. Let's get those stories out about all of the people you've helped and hear it in their own words, how they came to your work and how it has impacted what they're able to do. And I'm sure that people will see that and say, we have a lot of trouble in the world. Here's a way to help alleviate some of that. So good luck to you and what you're doing.
Art, I really appreciate that, and I just want to underline that point you made. It is true that you'd just be surprised at how much change even a small amount of money can make for some people in some of these circumstances. And as I said, when we measure across all our projects last year, each dollar in is ending up as $5.60 in the
Yeah.
pocket. So if someone's able to give $100, that puts $560 into somebody's pocket somewhere where they really need it. And so even a small gift can make a big difference. And we appreciate everybody thinking about that. And I appreciate that work of what is it called? The Generosity
The Generosity Commission, yeah, you should look
Commission.
at
I like that, yeah.
the work is published and it's in a report. You can get it. And hopefully, we can encourage people to have a conversation about what we need to do in this country to get people giving again.
I think Americans and the people around the world are, generous when they're able to and generous when they feel like they can make a difference. And so hats off to organizations like BBB, Wise Giving Alliance, who really help them find those opportunities to make a difference.
Thank you. Well, Will, I appreciate you joining the show today, and I want to just say to anyone listening for the first time, this is a weekly podcast, and every Tuesday we come out with a new episode for you, and you can hear people like Will and many others who are doing incredible work to change the world in a positive way. And so if you need to be inspired because you're working in an organization and like all of us, we hit our moment, we have our moments when things aren't going the way we want them to, and we need a little inspiration too.
Oh, yeah.
Check out this show. If you're someone sitting on the fence trying to figure out, well, where do I give my money or where do I give my time? Check out this show. You're going to find lots of stories about how you can get connected and get off that fence and get into making change in the world and displaying in a good way your heart of giving. Thank you for listening. If you want to support the podcast, you can go to give.org and make a gift. We would certainly appreciate that and put it to great use. We'll see you back here next week, hopefully.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.